Imagine, if you will, that you possess a magic ring.
Okay.
And I mean, this isn't just any piece of jewelry. When you twist the setting on your finger, you become completely, flawlessly invisible.
Wow. Like totally undetectable.
Exactly. It's the ultimate, get out of jail free card. You could walk right into a bank vault and just take whatever you wanted.
Right.
You could slip into the locked offices of your competitors. You could listen in on your enemies or even your closest friends without them ever knowing you were there.
That is a lot of power.
It is. You could literally get away with absolutely anything. I mean, there are no cameras, no witnesses, zero consequences. So here is the timeless, slightly uncomfortable question for you to chew on today.
I'm ready.
Would you still follow the rules? Or is being good just something you do because, oh, you're terrified of getting caught?
Man, that really forces a confrontation with the very foundation of our character, doesn't it?
It really does.
Because when you strip away the surveillance cameras, the police force, the societal expectations, and just the fear of losing your reputation, what is actually left?
Right.
Does morality exist entirely independently inside the human mind? Or is it merely a performance we put on to survive within a community?
And that friction, that exact tension between internal goodness and external reward, that's the beating heart of our mission on this deep dive today.
Yeah, it's a big one.
We are stepping into one of the most ruthless, unrelenting philosophical debates ever recorded. We're looking at the core arguments that set the stage for Western thought, led by Socrates.
And, people hear Plato's Republic and they think of some elevated, sterile classroom.
Oh, absolutely. Dusty manuscripts and old guys in togas.
Right. But this doesn't start there at all. It begins in a dinner party in the port district of Athens. And this party gets completely hijacked and rapidly escalates into this bare-knuckle examination of what it actually means to be a just person.
Yeah, and the brilliance of how this conversation begins is just how deceptively mundane it is.
Totally.
The narrative thrust starts with a casual check-in on the realities of aging. So Socrates is mingling, and he approaches an older man named Cephalus.
Right. And Cephalus is wealthy, he's comfortable, he's sitting on this cushioned stool, having just performed a religious sacrifice.
He's living the good life.
Exactly. He really embodies the established, conventional morality of the older generation.
So Socrates essentially asks him for the trip report on getting old. He wants to know if it's as miserable as everyone claims it is.
Because you'd expect the standard complaints, right? Like aching joints and being ignored by the youth.
Yeah, but Cephalus offers this incredibly counterintuitive perspective. He says his peers sit around mourning their lost youth. Like, they miss the drinking, the wild feasts, the sexual exploits.
They act like their lives have effectively ended because the physical party is over.
Right. But Cephalus is profoundly relieved.
He is. He actually brings up a quote from the poet Sophocles.
Oh, yeah, the Sophocles story.
Yeah, so when someone asked Sophocles if he was still capable of, making love to a woman, the poet replied that he was thrilled to have escaped all of that.
Which is such a funny response.
It is. He called those youthful appetites a fierce and frenzied master. And Cephalus completely aligns with this.
He views the fading of physical desire not as a loss, but as an emancipation.
Exactly. A prison break from your own hormones, basically.
It's an interesting psychological framework. I mean, we spend our youth entirely subservient to these chaotic biological drives, ambition, lust, hunger.
And we think that fulfilling them is the definition of freedom.
Right. But Cephalus flips that completely. To him, true freedom is the silence that comes when the drives finally shut up.
But, that silence allows for a peaceful mind, assuming you have a decent character.
Which is a big assumption.
Very big. And Socrates immediately tests the structural integrity of that peace. He basically suggests that the general public would probably look at Cephalus and assume his serenity has less to do with his impeccable character.
And a whole lot more to do with his massive bank account.
Exactly.
Which is such a deeply cynical but super relatable modern thought. Sure, you're enlightened and peaceful, you're a multimillionaire.
Yeah, but Cephalus doesn't deny it.
No, he doesn't.
He admits the wealth plays a massive role. But the mechanism of why it helps is fascinating. It's not about luxury. It's not about buying the best wine or the softest cushions.
Right, it's about the psychology of death.
Exactly. As you approach the end of your life, the existential dread begins to set in. The stories you heard as a child about the underworld, the punishments waiting for those who committed crimes, they suddenly stop sounding like fairy tales.
They start sounding like impending reality.
Right. Cephalus describes waking up in the middle of the night in a cold sweat, terrified that he might owe a debt to a man, or maybe a sacrifice to the gods.
So in his mind, wealth is basically a metaphysical insurance policy.
That's a great way to put it.
Having money means you are never forced into a corner where you have to cheat someone or lie to get by or steal to feed your family. You can afford to be perfectly honest and square all your bets.
Your ledger is clean.
Yeah. And that brings us to the very first functional definition of justice in this entire debate. Justice is simply telling the truth and returning what is owed.
Which is the ultimate transactional morality. I mean, it's clean, it's measurable, and it's entirely rule-based.
But Socrates zeroes in on the rigidity of that definition. He proposes a scenario to just completely break the rule.
Oh, the weapon scenario.
Yeah. Imagine you borrow a weapon from a friend. At the time of the agreement, your friend is completely sane. But time passes, and your friend suffers a severe mental break. He goes completely mad, comes to your door, and demands his weapon back.
So, mapping this directly onto a modern scenario for you listening, it's exactly like having a friend who drove to a bar, got wildly intoxicated, and handed you their car keys.
Oh, that's a perfect analogy.
Right. Later in the night, they're stumbling around, demanding the keys back so they can drive home.
Which is terrifying.
Totally. But by Cephalus's strict transactional definition of justice, you owe them those keys. The keys are their property. You made a verbal contract to hold them.
But handing a drunk person the keys to a 2-ton vehicle is universally understood to be the wrong thing to do.
Exactly. The underlying logic Socrates exposes here is that justice cannot merely be a rigid adherence to legalistic rules.
Right. If a rule commands you to perform an action that results in catastrophic harm, the rule itself is insufficient.
Justice must be fundamentally linked to what is good and beneficial in a given context. Returning the weapon is owing, but it creates a disastrous outcome. Therefore, it cannot be the act of a just person.
And Cephalus actually taps out of the conversation at this point, doesn't he?
He really does. He literally leaves to go tend to the sacrifices.
Which is brilliantly symbolic. Like he retreats back into his comfortable, unexamined religious rituals rather than face the collapse of his worldview.
Yep. He leaves his son, Polemarchus, to inherit the argument. And Polemarchus tries to salvage this transactional idea by pivoting to tribalism.
Okay, so how does he define it?
He brings in the authority of another poet, Simonides, and redefines justice as giving every person what is appropriate to them. In practical terms, Polemarchus says this means helping your friends and harming your enemies.
Ah, the ultimate us versus them mentality. Loyalty to the in-group, hostility to the out-group.
Exactly. It's how street gangs operate. It's how partisan politics operates.
But Socrates goes to work dismantling this too, right? Using analogies of specific crafts and skills.
Yeah, he asks, if you are sick and need to be healed, who is the best person to help a friend and harm an enemy?
Well, a doctor.
Right, and if you are navigating a dangerous storm at sea, who is the most useful?
A ship's captain.
A ship's captain.
Yeah.
So Socrates forces Polemarchus to identify the specific arena where the just man is the undisputed expert.
And Polemarchus struggles with this.
He does. He eventually claims the just man is most useful in partnerships, specifically when it comes to keeping money safe.
Which leads to a hilarious logical dead end. Socrates basically proves that if justice is only useful for guarding money when it's not being used, then justice is only useful when the object itself is completely useless.
It's a great logical trap. But the real philosophical breakthrough, the mechanism that destroys Polemarchus's argument entirely, is when they analyze the concept of harming your enemies.
Okay, let's get into that, because this is a profound shift in ethical thinking.
It really is. Socrates asks a simple, seemingly disconnected question. He says, if you treat a horse poorly, if you harm it, does it become a better horse or a worse horse?
Well, it becomes worse, specifically worse by the standard of, equine excellence.
Right, and if I abuse a dog, it becomes a vicious, broken dog. It becomes worse at being a dog.
Following that exact trajectory, Socrates asks what happens when you harm a human being.
And by the laws of causality, harming a human being degrades them. It makes them worse by the standard of human excellence.
And what is the highest standard of human excellence in this context?
It is justice.
Therefore, harming a human being makes them more unjust.
That is a staggering conclusion. You cannot use justice to manufacture more injustice. It's a physical and logical impossibility within this framework.
Right, like a musician cannot use the art of music to make someone unmusical. A master carpenter doesn't use carpentry to make someone worse at building things.
So a genuinely good and just person cannot use their goodness to degrade another human being.
Vengeance, retaliation, causing deliberate harm even to an enemy who has wronged you can never be classified as a just act. Justice can only elevate, it can never degrade.
We've completely obliterated the idea of reciprocal harm.
And just as you think everyone is going to sit back, sip their wine and agree on this highly elevated, peaceful, moral standard,
The entire atmosphere of the room shatters.
it totally does. Up to this point, it's been a polite, gentlemanly parlor game. But suddenly we are thrown into raw, cynical, real politics.
Enter Thrasymachus. The text describes his entrance like a wild beast coiling up and springing at them.
He is furious.
He is a sophist, a professional rhetorician, and he has been sitting on the sidelines absolutely seething. He is furious with Socrates' method.
The way Socrates plays the innocent interrogator, right? Asking questions, poking holes in everyone else's definitions, but never risking a definition of his own.
Exactly. Thrasymachus is the voice of the ultimate cynic. It's a voice that is incredibly loud in our world right now. He steps in and forcefully declares that the debate is over and he possesses the real, unvarnished truth.
And what's his definition?
Justice, according to Thrasymachus, is nothing more than the advantage of the stronger.
The pure distillation of might makes right.
He argues that if you look at any society, whether it's a democracy, an oligarchy, or a tyranny, the ruling class holds the power. And what do they do with that power?
They write the laws.
They design the legal architecture entirely to benefit themselves, to protect their wealth, and to secure their dominance.
And here's the really insidious part of his argument. Once those self-serving laws are written, the rulers label obedience to those laws as justice.
Right. So when the average citizen is being just and following the rules, all they're really doing is serving the interests of the elite.
Morality is just a scam invented by the powerful to keep the weak compliant.
It's a compelling, deeply pessimistic view of power dynamics. But Socrates, completely unbothered by the aggression, calmly steps into the trap Thrasymachus has set.
He does it so smoothly.
He begins by asking a simple question about human fallibility. Do rulers ever make mistakes?
And Thrasymachus, relying on common sense, admits that yes, rulers are human, they make errors.
This is where Socrates brings the logical snare. He says, okay, if a ruler makes a mistake and passes a law that actually harms the ruler's own interest.
But the citizens are still legally and morally required to obey that law because that is justice.
Then the citizens are acting contrary to the ruler's advantage.
Wow. Therefore, by Thrasymachus' own logic, justice sometimes means doing what harms the stronger.
It reveals a fatal contradiction in the argument. However, Thrasymachus is a seasoned debater. He recognizes the trap and immediately shifts his ground.
He tightens his definitions.
Yeah, he argues that when we use the word ruler in the absolute most precise sense, we are talking about a professional exercising their craft flawlessly.
Right. He uses the accountant analogy. If I hire an accountant and they make a catastrophic math error on my taxes, in the exact moment they make that error, they are not acting as an accountant. They are acting as a flawed human.
Because an accountant, by definition of the ideal skill, does not make math errors.
Exactly the same applies to the ruler, says Thrasymachus. The true, ideal ruler does not make mistakes. They perfectly calculate their own advantage and flawlessly enact it.
But Socrates takes this tightened, hyper-precise definition of a true professional and uses it to completely dismantle Thrasymachus.
How does he do it?
He flips the orientation of what its skill actually does. He looks at the true doctor. Does the art of medicine exist to benefit the doctor? No. The art of medicine is applied to the human body to benefit the patient.
Right. Does the art of horsemanship exist to benefit the rider? No, it exists to improve the horse.
Does a ship's captain command the ship to benefit himself? No. He exercises his authority for the safety and benefit of the sailors under his command.
The underlying law Socrates establishes here is that every true art, every genuine skill, acts for the benefit of its subject, not its practitioner.
The skill looks outward, addressing the needs and deficiencies of the thing it is applied to.
Therefore, if we are using Thrasymachus' strict definition of a perfect professional, the true ruler does not rule to benefit himself.
The true art of ruling is directed entirely, 100%, at the benefit of the ruled, the subjects.
It completely inverts Thrasymachus' premise, but this is a point where the theoretical logic seems to clash heavily with observable reality.
Oh, absolutely.
I have to interject here, because if I'm tracking this argument, my modern brain is screaming an objection.
Let's hear it.
When I look around at the world, people do their jobs for themselves. A CEO isn't running a corporation purely out of a selfless desire to provide software to the masses. They want their stock options to vest. A surgeon heals people, yes, but they also want to buy a massive house. How can Socrates claim that the skill is purely selfless? The doctor is clearly getting an advantage.
That is the exact friction that needs addressing, and the text provides a remarkably nuanced explanation for it. Socrates makes a crucial distinction between different types of arts.
Okay.
He separates the art of medicine from what he calls the art of earning a living or the art of wages.
Okay, unpack that mechanism. How are they separate?
Think about the actual application of the skill. When a doctor is diagnosing an illness, prescribing medication, or performing surgery, that specific set of actions, the medicine only benefits the patient.
Right.
The medicine itself does not generate a house or a car for the doctor. If the doctor heals someone for free, the art of medicine has still been perfectly executed.
The healing occurs independently of the transaction.
Precisely. To survive, the doctor must practice a completely secondary parallel skill, the art of demanding and collecting wages.
So the healing helps the patient, the billing helps the doctor.
They're two entirely distinct crafts happening simultaneously.
That is a brilliant clarification. The core skill of leadership, the actual mechanics of ruling a city, provides no inherent benefit to the ruler.
And this leads Socrates to a really dark but fascinating conclusion about political power.
Which is?
If ruling inherently benefits the subjects and not the ruler, then truly good, rational people will never actively seek power.
They won't run for office for the money because they aren't mercenaries.
Right, they won't run for the prestige or the statues because they aren't driven by vanity. To get a truly good person to accept the immense burden of leadership, you have to compel them. You have to force them.
And the penalty that forces them to take the job is profound. The ultimate punishment for refusing to lead is being ruled by someone vastly inferior to yourself.
Yes, good people take on the crushing weight of leadership solely out of fear.
They look around, realize that if they don't step up, a tyrant or a fool will take the wheel and drive the society off a cliff.
They rule out of necessity to protect themselves and their families from incompetent governance.
And Thrasymachus is verbally wrestled into submission by this relentless logic. He ends up sweating profusely, blushing, and retreating into sarcastic one-word answers.
Socrates has dismantled the argument that justice is just the advantage of the stronger.
But, and this is a massive, but even though Thrasymachus lost the debate, the underlying anxiety remains completely unresolved.
Thrasymachus also claimed that the unjust life is fundamentally happier and more profitable than the just life.
Right. Does crime actually pay if you are smart enough, ruthless enough, and good enough at covering your tracks? Socrates hasn't proven that the just man is actually happier.
And this unresolved tension is what drives the entire remainder of the text. The younger generation in the room, Glaucon and Adeimantus, who historically were Plato's actual brothers, they step forward.
And they are intensely dissatisfied.
Very. They feel that Socrates won on a technicality of definitions, but didn't address the reality of human desire. They demand a bulletproof, unassailable defense of justice for its own sake, completely stripped of any external rewards.
Glaucon sets the parameters of this challenge by categorizing the things we consider good. He outlines 3 tiers.
First, there are things we want purely for their own sake, like a sudden feeling of joy or harmless entertainment. They don't produce any long-term results, but we like the experience.
Second, there are things we want only for their consequences. This is the grueling stuff. Enduring a painful dental procedure, working a miserable, exhausting job. You hate the actual process, but you endure it because you desperately want the health or the paycheck at the end.
And then there is the third highest category. Things we desire for both their own sake and for their consequences. Being healthy, for instance. You feel good in the moment, and it prolongs your life. Having good eyesight.
Socrates confidently places justice in this highest category. He claims it is inherently joyful to be just, and it produces good results.
But Glaucon points out that the vast majority of human beings completely disagree. Most people place justice firmly in that second category.
It's a chore, it's a burden, it's a necessary evil that we only endure because of the consequences.
And this leads Glaucon to articulate what we now call the social contract theory.
He argues that human nature is fundamentally self-interested. Deep down, everyone wants to commit injustice.
We all want the power to take whatever we desire, to dominate our rivals, to act on every impulse without restriction. But simultaneously, we are terrified of suffering injustice at the hands of someone stronger than us.
So we do the math. We realize the horror of being constantly victimized vastly outweighs the pleasure of occasionally victimizing someone else.
Because we are too weak to dominate everyone, we compromise. We come together, we draft laws, and we agree not to harm each other.
But we do this purely out of weakness and fear, not because we actually love justice. We only play by the rules because we don't want to get punched in the face.
To brutally illustrate this inherent selfishness, Glaucon deploys the thought experiment we opened with, the Ring of Gyges.
The Invisible Ring. It is a story designed to strip away the fear of consequence entirely.
The myth goes that a shepherd is out with his flock when an earthquake rips open the ground, revealing a hidden chasm.
He climbs down and finds a hollow bronze horse with a giant corpse inside.
The corpse is completely naked, except for a gold ring on its finger. The shepherd takes the ring.
Later, while sitting at a campfire with the other shepherds, he absent-mindedly twists the setting of the ring inward toward his palm, and he instantly vanishes.
He becomes entirely invisible to the people sitting right next to him. He twists it outward, and he reappears.
He has just acquired absolute unchecked power. He is completely free from the surveillance of society.
And what does this average, presumably law-abiding shepherd do with this power? Does he become a vigilante for justice?
No. He immediately maneuvers his way into the royal court, seduces the queen, murders the king, and seizes control of the entire kingdom.
Glaucon's argument is chillingly straightforward. Anyone would do this.
If you give the magic ring to the most profoundly just man and another ring to the most depraved criminal, their paths will inevitably converge. Once the fear of being caught is removed, human nature will always default to self-interest and injustice.
To solidify the challenge, Glaucon demands that Socrates compare two extreme hypothetical lives. We need to isolate justice and injustice to see which one genuinely produces happiness.
First, imagine the perfectly unjust man. This is a master criminal, an apex predator, but he is a genius at public relations.
He is so skilled at his deception that he possesses a flawless, spotless reputation for absolute moral purity.
Because society believes he is a saint, he reaps all the rewards, he marries into the best families, he holds the highest political offices, he accumulates massive wealth, and he's universally beloved and respected.
He is a monster behind closed doors, but he wins at the game of life.
Now contrast him with a perfectly just man. This man possesses pure, unadulterated goodness in his soul. He wants to be good, not merely seem good.
But Glaucon says, to truly test if his justice is enough to sustain him, we have to strip away every single external reward. We must give this perfectly just man the worst possible reputation.
The world must look at this saint and see a monster. He is universally despised. He is hated by his friends, shunned by his family, thrown into a maximum security prison, tortured, and ultimately crucified.
The whole world is utterly convinced he's the worst villain in history, yet his soul remains perfectly just.
It is the starkest, most agonizing dichotomy imaginable. And then Adeimantus, Glaucon's brother, adds the final nail to the coffin.
He points out how we educate our children. Parents do not tell their kids, be just because the internal state of a just soul is inherently beautiful.
No, parents say, be a good person so your teachers will like you, so you can get a high-paying job, so the community will respect you, and so the gods won't punish you in the afterlife.
We market morality entirely based on its side effects. We bribe people to be good.
Exactly. So the gauntlet is thrown down for Socrates. He must prove that the tortured, hated, crucified just man is still somehow fundamentally happier and better off than the triumphant, beloved, wealthy, unjust man.
And he must do it without relying on karma, without relying on reputation, and without relying on rewards from the gods.
He has to prove that justice itself, residing purely in the invisible soul, is the ultimate good.
Faced with this seemingly impossible task, trying to dissect the invisible mechanics of an individual human mind under extreme duress, Socrates proposes a radical methodological shift.
He realizes that trying to locate the genesis of justice inside a single person is too microscopic. The data is too small to read.
He uses a brilliant analogy to explain his pivot. He says, imagine someone with terrible eyesight who is asked to read a piece of paper with tiny microscopic text on it from across the room.
It's impossible.
But then they realize that the exact same text is written in massive, glowing letters on a giant billboard right outside the window. You would read the billboard first, understand the message, and then look back at the small paper to confirm it.
So instead of squinting at the individual psychology of one man, Socrates says, let's zoom out. The human soul is the small text. A society, a city, is the billboard. It's the human soul writ large.
Let's conceptually build a city from absolute scratch, from its very first foundations, and watch carefully to see the exact moment where justice and injustice are born.
This shift marks the transition from moral psychology into foundational political philosophy. Socrates begins analyzing the origin of any human collective. Why do cities exist at all?
They exist because of mutual need. No human being is entirely self-sufficient. We cannot individually farm our own food, weave our own clothes, and build our own houses efficiently.
And that biological reality leads to the cornerstone of his entire societal blueprint, the division of labor.
It's the concept that human beings possess different natural aptitudes. Some people have a physiological and mental disposition for agriculture. Some have the spatial awareness for architecture. Some have the dexterity for cobbling shoes.
The mechanism of the division of labor dictates that work is produced at the highest quality and in the greatest quantity when one person focuses strictly on the single task they are naturally suited for and completely ignores everything else.
The farmer shouldn't waste time trying to make a terrible pair of shoes. He should grow excess wheat and trade it for shoes made by an expert.
Based on this hyper-efficient principle, Socrates constructs the first iteration of his society. It is remarkably simple. It's a tiny community of farmers, builders, and weavers.
They produce exactly what is required for survival and a little comfort. The diet consists of barley cakes and wheat flour, served simply on reeds or clean leaves. They drink moderate amounts of wine.
They work hard, they wear no shoes in the summer, they sing hymns to the gods, and they live in peaceful, healthy poverty, purposely limiting their family size to avoid outstripping their resources.
Socrates views this as the true and healthy city. It perfectly satisfies human needs without generating excess or greed.
But Glaucon immediately interrupts the thought experiment. He is appalled by the austerity of it.
Glaucon literally scoffs and calls it a city of pigs.
And frankly, my modern sensibilities completely align with Glaucon here. A bunch of people eating plain barley on a pile of leaves. It sounds like a mandatory, unending survivalist retreat. There is no culture, no art, no spice, no ambition. Where is the dessert?
Glaucon demands the comforts of civilization. He wants couches to recline on, tables to eat from, relishes for the food, and pastries.
And Socrates concedes to this demand. He agrees to examine what he calls the feverish or luxurious city.
Because he knows that while the simple city is healthy, it is in the transition to luxury, the psychological shift from satisfying needs to chasing wants, that injustice truly begins to infect a society.
This is a crucial psychological observation. Once you cross the threshold of basic survival and say, we require perfumes and prostitutes and calligraphers and actors and complex pastries, the city's desires immediately and violently exceed its natural resources.
The land that was perfectly sufficient to feed the simple farmers is no longer enough to support herds of cattle for daily meat consumption.
And when your desires exceed your borders, the mechanism of imperialism is triggered. To sustain the luxury, you must forcefully take a slice of your neighbor's land.
And because your neighbors have likely also surrendered to the endless pursuit of wealth, they want a slice of yours. This, Socrates points out with devastating clarity, is the inevitable origin of war.
War is not an anomaly. It is the mathematical consequence of a society whose appetites have outgrown its sustainability.
So now we have a feverish city, and war is an absolute certainty. But remember the foundational rule of this society, the division of labor.
If everyone is mandated to perform only the job they are naturally suited for, then fighting can't just be a weekend hobby for the local blacksmith.
The shoemaker cannot just drop his tools, pick up a heavy bronze shield, and magically become an elite hoplite. War is an incredibly complex art.
Therefore, the city requires a dedicated, full-time, professional military class. Socrates calls these soldiers the guardians.
And the physical and mental requirements for this class are incredibly stringent. They must possess the speed to catch an enemy, the physical strength to fight them, and the unyielding courage to face death.
But the moment you create an elite class of heavily armed, fiercely trained killers, you introduce a massive, potentially fatal paradox into your society.
The paradox of the guardian. These individuals hold a monopoly on violence. What is to stop them from realizing their power, turning their weapons inward, and enslaving the very citizens they were hired to protect?
Right. They need to be incredibly aggressive, fierce, and lethal when facing external threats, but simultaneously they must be perfectly gentle, restrained, and protective toward the internal civilian population.
If they lack ferocity, the city gets conquered. If they lack gentleness, the city gets destroyed from the inside by a military coup.
It seems like an impossible psychological contradiction. Ferocity and gentleness are diametrically opposed traits. How can one's soul contain both simultaneously without fracturing?
Socrates points to a phenomenon in the natural world to prove that this specific combination is biologically possible: the pedigree guard dog.
When I first encountered this in the text, it felt almost absurd. We are navigating these profound depths of political philosophy, and Socrates suddenly brings up a golden retriever. Is he genuinely reducing the ethical framework of a highly trained military force to the instincts of a domestic pet?
It sounds reductive until we unpack the specific mechanism of how the dog decides to act. A well-bred guard dog is incredibly fierce, vicious even, towards strangers. Yet it is perfectly docile, loving, and obedient to the people it knows, even if those familiars have never fed it or shown it affection. What is the dividing line between its ferocity and its gentleness?
It's familiarity, it's recognition.
Exactly. The dog bases its entire behavioral output purely on knowledge versus ignorance. It sees what it knows, and it loves it. It sees what it doesn't know, and it attacks it.
Because the dog uses knowledge, the act of distinguishing the known truth from the unknown, as the absolute metric for its actions, Socrates playfully, yet seriously, labels this dog-like trait as philosophical.
It is a lover of learning, a lover of the familiar truth.
That reframes the entire concept. It's not about blind animalistic aggression. It's about being guided by intellect and understanding.
If a guardian relies purely on emotion or bloodlust, they are unpredictable and dangerous. But if their ferocity is governed by a deep philosophical love for the truth of their society, they become safe.
But achieving that specific, delicate equilibrium in a human being is infinitely more complex than breeding a dog. A human mind is chaotic.
You cannot leave the development of a guardian's soul to chance. It requires an incredibly rigorous, meticulously engineered system of education. This brings the deep dive into some deeply controversial, almost totalitarian territory.
If the survival of the city depends on perfectly shaped souls, Socrates argues that you must absolutely control the environment that shapes them. You have to seize control of the narrative. The founders of the city must become the ultimate, uncompromising censors.
Socrates understands neuroplasticity long before the term existed. He recognizes that a child's mind is highly malleable, soft like wax. The early stories, myths, and fables they absorb leave indelible imprints on their psychological development.
Therefore, he insists that the state must ruthlessly censor the storytellers and the poets.
And he isn't just banning fringe writers. He is targeting the absolute foundational pillars of Greek culture and religion. He goes straight after Homer and Hesiod.
He proposes two distinct categories of censorship. The first is theological. He establishes strict parameters for how the gods can be depicted. First, the gods must only ever be portrayed as the source of good. They are never the cause of evil or suffering.
Which completely upends traditional Greek mythology. In Homer, Zeus has two jars on his floor, one filled with blessings, one filled with miseries, and he mixes them up and hands them out to humans arbitrarily.
Socrates says this is a toxic lie. God is inherently good, and good can only produce good. If humans suffer, the poet must explain it as a necessary, beneficial punishment that improved their souls, not as arbitrary cruelty from the divine.
He also mandates that gods do not change shape, transform, or disguise themselves.
The logic here is fascinating. If a being is already perfectly good and beautiful, any change it undergoes must inherently be a change for the worse. Perfection cannot improve. Since a god would never choose to make itself worse, it cannot change.
Furthermore, gods do not lie, deceive, or send false visions. Socrates draws a distinction between a verbal falsehood, which humans sometimes use harmlessly, like lying to an enemy in wartime or preventing a friend from making a tragic mistake, and a true falsehood, which is ignorance or deception residing deep within the soul.
The gods have no enemies to trick and no mad friends to manage, so they have zero use for lies.
The underlying anxiety Socrates has here is behavioral modeling. If you tell a generation of future soldiers that the supreme rulers of the universe constantly cheat on their spouses, betray their allies, shift their shapes to avoid consequences, and lie to achieve their goals, which is literally every chapter of Greek mythology, then those youths will inevitably internalize that behavior.
They will think, if the literal gods lack self-control, why should I restrain myself? Bad theology is the root of bad morality.
Once the theology is sanitized, Socrates moves to moral censorship. If the primary function of a guardian is to protect the city in battle, the single greatest threat to their efficacy is the fear of death.
To eradicate this fear, Socrates commands the deletion of every single terrifying description of the afterlife.
He goes through Homer with a red pen. He strikes out all the descriptions of the underworld, Hades.
No wailing rivers of fire, no squeaking bat-like souls flitting around in the dark, no ancient heroes bitterly complaining that they would rather be a living slave than the king of the dead.
If the afterlife is depicted as a realm of horrific gloom, the soldiers will fear death more than defeat, and they will break formation and run.
The censorship extends to emotional regulation as well. Heroes, and especially gods, must never be shown weeping in deep grief, wailing, or even giving in to uncontrollable bouts of laughter.
They must exhibit absolute stoic self-discipline at all times. They cannot succumb to greed, lust, or arrogance.
When Achilles throws a massive violent tantrum over losing his war prize, or when he drags Hector's body behind his chariot out of pure spite, Socrates says those passages must be erased from the cultural memory.
This argument echoes so loudly in our modern discourse. It is the ancient ancestor of the debate over whether violent video games, explicit movies, or toxic social media algorithms cause real-world behavioral issues.
Socrates is essentially proposing a strict, state-mandated content algorithm designed specifically to optimize the mental health and moral rigidity of the youth.
To Socrates, art is never merely passive entertainment. It is the software running on the hardware of the city. If you input corrupted, chaotic data, you will output corrupted, chaotic citizens.
But it is not just what the stories say that concerns him. It is fundamentally how they are delivered.
Yes, the mechanism of delivery. He makes a profound distinction between simple narrative, where the poet uses their own voice to just summarize what happened, and then Agamemnon said this, and imitation, or mimesis.
Imitation is drama. It's acting. It's when the poet or the reader physically adopts the voice, the posture, and the mindset of the character.
The psychology of imitation is crucial here. Socrates believes that when we imitate someone, we aren't just playing pretend. The act of imitation slowly rewires our neurobiology.
The habits of speech, the emotional cadences, the physical postures we mimic eventually sink into our actual nature. We become what we pretend to be.
Therefore, the guardians are strictly forbidden from participating in most drama. If they are going to imitate anyone, they must only ever imitate brave, self-controlled, pious, and free individuals.
If they are allowed to act out the roles of cowards, slaves, drunkards, or madmen in theatrical plays, the chaotic essence of those characters will eventually embed itself permanently into their own souls.
The shaping of the soul, however, goes beyond just the lyrical content of the stories. The emotional resonance of the music itself is equally powerful. This brings us to the tuning of the soul.
Education must engage the entire human apparatus, both the body and the mind, in perfect, orchestrated harmony.
Having completely censored the literature, Socrates turns his attention to the music playlist. And he is just as ruthless. He systematically bans entire categories of musical modes, which are essentially the ancient equivalents of musical scales or keys.
He outlaws the mournful modes, like the Mixolydian, because they induce sorrow and depression, which are useless for soldiers.
He also bans the relaxed or luxurious modes like the Ionian and Lydian. These were the modes associated with drinking parties, softness, and indulgence.
He strips the musical landscape down to just two acceptable modes. First, the Dorian mode, which he describes as the sound of a brave man standing firm in battle or enduring severe misfortune with discipline.
And second, the Phrygian mode, which is the sound of a man engaged in peaceful, voluntary action, calmly persuading someone or praying to the gods.
Basically, in this city, you are only allowed to listen to aggressive battle marches or ambient, focused study beats.
And the instrumentation is heavily restricted to enforce this. No complex, multi-stringed harps capable of playing all the panharmonic scales. No aulos, the reed pipes, associated with wild, ecstatic Dionysian rituals.
The guardians are only permitted the lyre and the cithara for the city, and a simple pipe for the shepherds in the fields. The fundamental rule is that the rhythm and the melody must always submit to and follow the disciplined word.
The music serves the rational thought. The thought never gets lost in the intoxicating music.
It's an intense level of psychological engineering, and it extends completely into physical education as well. The diet of the guardians is subjected to the exact same philosophy of simplicity.
They eat roasted meats, mostly because roasting doesn't require carrying a bunch of pots and pans on military campaigns. There are no complex sauces. And there is a strict ban on Syracusan cuisine and Attic pastries.
It's the ancient equivalent of banning deep-fried fast food, heavily processed sugars, and decadent desserts.
And the causality Socrates draws between diet, music, and the overall health of the society is fascinating. He argues that complexity, variety, and luxury in food inevitably breed physical disease in the body, in the exact same way that complexity and variety in music breed spiritual indiscipline in the soul.
This leads him to a brilliant diagnostic test for a society. He says the clearest, most undeniable symptom of a sick, failing city is an overabundance of doctors and lawyers.
Think about the underlying failure that requires those professions. A healthy society shouldn't need a massive legal infrastructure. If the citizens were properly educated with simple, harmonious music and stories, they would possess a strong internal moral compass.
They wouldn't need to constantly drag their neighbors to court and hire eloquent judges to resolve their petty disputes. The reliance on lawyers is a symptom of a collapsed internal morality.
And the reliance on a massive medical industry is a symptom of a collapsed physical discipline.
Hmm.
He isn't talking about treating wounds from battle or unavoidable seasonal plagues. He is criticizing the need for doctors to invent new names for diseases that are entirely the result of citizens living lazy, luxurious, overindulgent lifestyles.
If you need a judge, your soul has failed. If you need a doctor for a lifestyle disease, your body has failed.
He adds a highly nuanced point about the nature of a good judge. A good judge is not someone who has lived a rough life, committed crimes, and understands the criminal underworld firsthand.
Socrates argues that a corrupted soul cannot accurately judge corruption. A truly excellent judge is an older person who has kept their own soul pure their entire life and has only studied evil theoretically, safely from the outside, recognizing it as an alien concept rather than an internal familiar urge.
The ultimate objective of all these exhaustive regulations, the diet, the music, the literature, is to achieve a specific internal balance. Socrates reveals that the intense physical training, the gymnastics, isn't actually designed just to build muscles.
Its true purpose is psychological. It arouses and sharpens the spirited, fierce part of the soul.
And conversely, the music and poetry are not just for relaxation. They're designed to soften, refine, and philosophize the soul, making it gentle and rational. The genius of the education system is the tension between the two.
It's a harmonic balancing act. If a guardian spends their entire life lifting weights and fighting, completely ignoring music and philosophy, they become a savage, deaf beast. They lose their humanity.
But if they spend all their time bathed in soft music and poetry, neglecting their physical rigor, their spirit melts. They become soft, cowardly, and useless in a crisis. The perfect citizen requires the flawless blending of both forces.
Looking at this meticulously structured society from a modern perspective, it can easily feel suffocating. It feels like totalitarian deprivation. We value freedom, variety, and the messy complexity of human expression.
I look at my own life, my chaotic Spotify playlist crossing 10 different genres, my history on food delivery apps, ordering ridiculously complex meals, the morally ambiguous anti-hero shows I watch on television, and I know with absolute certainty Socrates would exile me from his perfect city before the sun went down.
But it forces a genuinely uncomfortable question. Is a life stripped of all this variety, all the complex, messy art we consume, actually beautiful?
To Socrates, it is the only true beauty. He believes that beauty is synonymous with simplicity, order, and harmony. The strategy behind immersing children in this highly curated environment of simple music, graceful architecture, and pure stories is profound.
Long before a child has the rational intellectual capacity to understand why a moral concept is good, their soul is being trained to recognize, resonate with, and fall in love with the rhythmic frequency of goodness.
That is the highest function of art in the Republic, to bypass the intellect and make the soul fall desperately in love with virtue.
It's an incredible journey we've taken today. Let's trace the massive arc of these arguments. We started in a comfortable living room in the Piraeus with Cephalus, discussing the relief of aging and the desire to die with a clean ledger.
That opened the door for Socrates to dismantle the transactional idea of justice, proving that following rigid rules isn't enough, and that a truly just person can never use their virtue to cause harm.
From there, the debate was violently ambushed by Thrasymachus, forcing a deep analysis of power dynamics. We navigated his cynical claim that justice is just a tool for the elite, ultimately revealing that the true art of leadership is fundamentally selfless, a burden taken on to prevent the disaster of being ruled by worse men.
Then Glaucon and Adimantus raised the stakes to an impossible height with the Ring of Gyges. They forced us to look at the terrifying allure of absolute invisibility, demanding to know why the tortured saint is fundamentally better off than the beloved master criminal.
And to answer that impossible question about the invisible human mind, we had to zoom out and conceptually build a civilization from scratch.
We observed the transition from the simple, sustainable society into the luxurious, feverish city. We saw how the explosion of human desire inevitably generates war, which necessitates the creation of the guardian-class warriors who must embody the paradoxical traits of a philosophical dog. Fiercely lethal to threats, yet perfectly gentle to their own.
And finally, we explored the extraordinary, frankly intimidating lengths Socrates argues a society must go to in order to protect the souls of those guardians. We looked at the strict psychological conditioning, the theological censorship of their oldest myths, the regulation of their diet, and the absolute control over their musical modes, all designed to engineer a perfectly balanced human being.
It is a text written millennia ago, yet it operates as a flawless mirror for our current moment. It bypasses the ancient historical context and directly challenges the architecture of our modern lives.
It demands that we look critically at the media ecosystem we immerse ourselves in, the hyper-processed diets we sustain our bodies with, and the massive legal and medical infrastructures we rely on. It forces us to ask, are the choices we make every single day nurturing healthy, harmonious souls, or are we just constantly throwing fuel onto the fire of our own feverish city?
It is a profound, unsettling challenge to our daily habits, especially concerning the entertainment we passively consume.
And that brings us to the final thought we want to leave you with today. As you go back to your routine, consider Socrates' warning about imitation. He argues with absolute conviction that reading about villains, watching tragedies, and listening to chaotic music actively neurologically damages your soul by causing you to subconsciously imitate those flaws.
So later tonight, when you sit down on your couch to binge the latest true crime series, or tune into a dark, morally bankrupt, anti-hero drama, pause for a second.
Ask yourself, are you merely being entertained? Or, by inviting that chaos into your mind, are you secretly letting Thrasymachus win?
It's the kind of question that stays with you long after the text is closed.
Keep questioning the world around you. Keep looking for the billboard when the print gets too small. We will catch you on the next deep dive.